Welcome to the podcast, Whiskey and a Map. Stories of adventure and expeditions as told by those who live them. I'm your host, Michael Reinhart. It has been said that many adventures and expeditions start simply with a map and a glass of whiskey, a desire to go and see the world's wild places. You're invited to pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of your favorite whiskey, and join us as we hear stories from another one of our friends just returned from the field. I would like to introduce you to a friend of mine, Chuck Jonke. Chuck is a unique individual. He is what you get when you cross a gifted musician and composer and a thirst for adventure. Chuck travels the world seeking out primitive tribal cultures to witness their rituals and document the music that accompanies them. He shares those experiences producing film and sound recordings through his company, Sonic Safari Music. Chuck, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Now, your bio has you as an ethnomusician anthropologist. It's one that's quite a mouthful.
That's just a bunch of PR.
But no, you travel the world seeking out tribal cultures to document and study their music, their ceremonies, and even recording the sounds from their environments. What got you into that? What led you this down this path?
Well, it probably started when I was around 19 or so, when I actually spent a couple of years living in South America, in Peru. And, suddenly living in a different environment with a different culture, I was really aware of some really amazing things, musically, of course, and then just culturally. So in Peru, in the upper Andes, you get some Andean music, which is really beautiful music, which is certainly part of their, just about all of their activities, especially ceremonial type things, religious. Down on the coast, you get Afro-Peruvian music. So after that experience, I decided to start traveling and have a little bit of a focus on the music. I mean, I was certainly traveling, doing photography and video, but looking for music, especially traditional music, in each area that I was in, led me into some really wonderful situations. So then I started recording these things and putting out CDs. Started off with, of course, cassettes, but then CDs of music, Peruvian music, African music, a lot of music in Mexico, Indonesia. And so this kind of led me into starting my Sonic Safari Music record label to be able to promote that music, and also to do my own music using instruments and sounds that I've collected from all those experiences.
Now, what is it about the tribal music that so interested you?
Well, I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I was hired by a company to do music of Southeast Asia for film. And so I found a lot of different groups that were doing, and this all had to be just traditional music, not modern. And I remember sitting in a room listening to Balinese gamelan music. I'd purchased a CD years before of that music, thinking that I was really going to like it, and just didn't like it at all. I hated it, in fact. When I sat in the room to hear this ensemble play the same style of music, it was an entirely different experience. I then could feel the spirit of the music, and there was a dance accompanied with it, and it was all part of their religious and ceremonial music. So there's a spirit to traditional music that you just don't find with maybe pop music, say. I mean, this music means a lot more to the people rather than just a transitory entertainment.
The music that you find out in the bush with these tribes, as you say, it's not entertainment. It's more just a central part, or just so ingrained into their ceremonies, into their belief systems. Is that what you're finding?
Well, yeah. So what I'm saying is that with most of the traditional music that I've recorded, it's not something to just sit around and drink a beer to. It's music that's a critical part of just about every aspect of these tribal their lives. For example, for a birth, when somebody's born, there's music that accompanies maybe a ceremony to welcome a child into the world. There's a thing called a tooth filing ceremony that I've seen. For just about every experience that they have in a lot of these groups, it's always accompanied with music. I mean, in fact, that's kind of one of the central parts. You usually have, of course, the priest or the tribal leader that's involved, but there's music that accompanies just about every aspect of these groups' existence.
And you've traveled literally almost every single continent, finding these tribes. Do you find that there's sort of a universality about this music and the central part it plays in all these tribal cultures around the world?
Well, certainly drums and percussion, rhythms. Rhythms are really important. I mean, in just about every culture that I've been to, I mean, sometimes just drum beats. And certainly in Africa, the drum is, king. Senegal and Gambia and all these other places, Morocco. The drum and percussion part of the music is really, really important, and in some cases drives, people going into like trances, for example. So there are similarities, and the music is not. Sometimes it just goes and goes for long periods of time. It's not like a 3-minute cut or a 3-minute tune. Sometimes these are things that are repeated over and over again. Processional music, lots of interesting processions that I've witnessed, and there's music that goes along with that, and certainly a lot of percussion and drums that are a part of that.
Speaking of drums, there was a ceremony that you were allowed to record and film, the peyote ceremony.
Right.
Let's play a clip from that recording.
Sure.
This peyote ceremony, how'd you come about being invited or getting to witness this?
Well, that was quite a story. My brother and I, and actually another friend, a third friend, were traveling in the Four Corners region, and we would stop off at these little curio shops where they sell artifacts from the different tribes. And of course, I'm always looking for anything musical, and I was certainly aware of different kind of Native American flutes that are made of different kinds of woods. Well, in addition to that, I found in the Four Corners region, I started hearing something about a water drum. And I said, I asked, what is a water drum? Well, the water drum is specifically used and only used for the peyote ceremony. And it basically consists of a black cooking pot of various sizes. They fill it half full of water, and they take a skin, and it's usually a thick hide of elk or moose or something of that nature. And they've got 7 turquoise stones, and they've got some leather twine type stuff. It's like a leather thong. And they attach the head using these elements to the top of the water drum. You flip it over, and it's a Star of David, and everything's very symbolic. I'm not exactly sure why the Star of David, but it is important to them. And so once it's constructed, they start beating on it with a particular beater. And as you tilt the drum, the water slaps the top of the head. So you get this kind of a pitch variation, as you heard in the recording, like goom, 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 goom. So as I went to several other shops, I kept an eye out for, peyote drum type materials, a water drum. And I saw a Native American guy purchasing a head for a water drum. So I knew he was a peyote guy. So I went up to him and I said, look, I'm really interested. My name's Chuck and I'm a composer and I would love to record a peyote ceremony. And he didn't say a word. He just kind of looked ahead and I thought, okay, well, maybe I offended him or I didn't know quite what to make of it. So I just sort of backed off. And I kept thinking about it. Man, I really would like to record this. And at that time, the government was giving peyote users a little bit of a problem. So maybe he thought I was, a government guy or something. So he left the shop and I followed him out and he got into his truck. His wife was sitting in the truck. I said, I would really love to record a peyote ceremony and I'll give you $200. I just threw out a number. He said, okay. Because I just didn't know what else to do. So I thought, well, money. Let's try some money. And then he said, okay, fine. So he gave me, and I didn't have that money, but I had to go get some, from the bank at the time, his address. And he said, come by in a couple of hours. So we went by a couple hours later, and it turned out he was behind his house was a big, huge teepee. Must have been about 20 feet tall. And inside the teepee were some nice carpets, and we were invited inside the teepee. So there was about 4 guys, and then 3 of us. There was a couple kids in there, and they assembled the water drum, and I got my recording gear ready. And to do that, the one guy who's a singer, and that happened to be the fellow that I originally met, he had an eagle bone whistle that was used. And then the other guys would just simply join in the chant, and then there was a water drum player. So they just took off and did about 8 or 9 peyote songs. So that was pretty wild. So I was right in there, and they smoked the peyote. You can either take it, I think they have what's called peyote buttons. They eat them, or in this case, they smoked it, and then away we went.
Did they explain to you what the whole ceremony was about or its purpose?
He said something about this being a prayer. And I actually, when I got home, I had to get a book on the peyote ceremony to do some investigation and found out the use of peyote goes back, thousands of years. And it means different things to different tribes. And basically, it's like a prayer to nature. And each one sounded almost identical to me. But obviously it was somewhat different. So that's about as far as I got from him. They wouldn't even give me their names because they just didn't want that out there. And actually that music was used later. The Doors movie. Oliver Stone did a movie on the Doors. There's a scene where Jim Morrison is out hallucinating in somewhere, and so that music's played in the background.
And that's your music? Yeah,
that's that peyote ceremony recording.
Your trips have taken you into the Amazon. In fact, have you been there more than one time?
Yeah, I've been there several times. Tribes that I've visited in the Amazon have usually been like really, really small. Just like 2 or 3 huts and that's it.
There's a story about you having a particular meal?
Ah, yes. So life is really hard in the deep Amazon. And even though you've got lush jungle all over the place, there's not much. They hunt and you can get a few things, and that's hard. You can fish. But as far as growing things, the only thing that really grows there easily is what's called manioc root. So I was out there, my brother and I went on this trip. We flew into Iquitos and then hired a guide and then went way out into the jungle through a tributary. And ended up in a little village called Atuncocha. Atuncocha is actually a Quechua word. So Quechua is kind of the Inca and pre-Inca language, or one of them. So it was a little village, and there was only just a few huts there, and it was quite the time there. We basically stayed in one of these huts, and then we had just a little mat to lay on, and then of course you have to have a mosquito net that you cover. Whenever you're on that mat, you've got to be covered with a mosquito net, or you're going to get little bug bites. So one morning I got up, and some woman walked past with a cooking pot. And I said, "Oh, what do you have there?" So she brings it up and takes a lid off, and I look inside, and here's a bunch of dead rats. And they really smell bad. It just smelled horrible, in fact. And I took a whiff of that, and it stuck with me all day long. It was such a bad smell. And I said, what do you do with those? Oh, we eat them. And then, oh, man, please. There's no refrigeration anywhere near, and these things have been dead for a while. So, this is when you start praying, please let me not have to eat that. So she went on, but that smell stuck with me. So we went off and did a little trip throughout the day, afternoon, and, to get some photography and just walk around, do some exploration. And came back and fortunately had a traditional Amazon meal that was fine. It was rice, manioc root, and some fish. I thought, oh, good. So I escaped the rat. Well, that night there was a special dinner. The chief of this little village comes up to me, and on a plate is this blackened, cooked rat, and the thing's on its back. So, it's the full rat with its, with its head and its paws and its little tail hanging off. It was gutted. And that was on the plate. And so nobody would start eating until I started in on this rat. I thought, oh, man. So, I started picking at this thing, and it really tasted badly. It was really, really terrible. And so then everybody else, started in on their rats. And I thought we're for sure we're going to get really, really sick, which we didn't. The side that we had on that was a little of alligator tail. And that was okay, the caiman. The alligator was fine, but the rat was really bad. And I was able to sort of get through it. And, of course, they offered me a number 2 rat, but I passed on it. And that was it. So I had to eat the dead rat.
Well, I guess when in Rome.
Yeah.
Let's go to Morocco.
Sure.
And I'm going to play a clip that you sent over regarding a particular ceremony that you were invited to and witnessed. So you're in Morocco, near Marrakesh, I believe?
Yeah, start off in Marrakesh.
Tell us about how you got to this ceremony.
Well, the first time I went to Morocco, it's funny. I was either going to go to Turkey or Morocco, and just happened to go to a concert of Ganawa music, this is the music that some of the music is fantastic in Morocco. And so, okay, that's where I'm going to go. So I just bought a ticket to Morocco, to Marrakesh, and then I just made it up. I just got on the flight, and on the flight, a fellow got on the flight in England, kind of a strange-looking character, and he had a long dreadlocks, a fedora hat with a feather in it, a big bone in his ear, really strange clothing, and just an interesting-looking character. So I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but the flight continued from London. We first stopped off in Casablanca. He got off the plane at Casablanca. We continued to Marrakesh. So in Marrakesh, I got there, and it was like quite late at night, and I started asking other passengers about a place to stay, and nobody seemed to give me any information. And the airport was kind of, people were just leaving the airport. So I just went up to a Moroccan, and I go, cheap hotel? And he just beckoned me out into the darkness of the night. Turns out he was the local bus driver, and I was his only passenger. So I got on this bus, and we drove into Marrakesh to the Medina. He just points off in the direction of the Medina, and so I got off and eventually found a pretty nice place deep in the Medina. The first night was not so great. The second night was great. So I went into this, at the time, an internet shop to get some information that a guy was going to send to me about some things to do in Morocco. And this fellow that had gotten on the flight in London was there. And I said, man, you were on the flight last night. How did you get here? And he said, well, I took the overnight train from Casablanca to Marrakesh. Well, anyways, so we, turns out he'd been a deadhead for a bunch of years, like 10 years. And then when that ended, he started coming to Morocco. And he'd come to Morocco for 3 months out of the year for the last several years. And I said, well, I'm a musician and composer. He said, well, that's what I do too. And I said, well, I'm looking for traditional music. He said, cool, I'll show you. So, that very first day, he took me deep into the Medina. We went to Abdul's shop. And there in Abdul's shop was a picture of Abdul with Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, which I thought, well, that's interesting. Here, this Abdul in Marrakesh is with these guys from Led Zeppelin. So anyways, that ended up being the first recording session that I set up of the Skanawa music. Was right there. So it happened a couple nights later inside the shop, in the back of the shop at night when they closed up the shop. And one of the players, a guy named Youssef, and I became very good friends. Well, the second trip to Morocco, I hooked up with Youssef, and he said, well, look, there's a big, huge Ganawa festival outside of the city of Meknes, and I'm going to go to. You want to go? I said, sure. So my brother and I went with him, took the train to this place called Meknes. Now, way up in the hills was this Ganawa festival. Well, the Ganawa festival was basically all Moroccans. We were like the only non-Moroccans that I could see. And it was pretty wild. And they were dragging sheep around, and they were going to be sacrificed, and there was lots of noise and music and dancing. And so we're walking around, and down in a little valley area just below us, there were some tents, and I could hear these women singing and chanting and stuff. And there were some sacrifices going on there of chickens and sheep. And this is all for fertility, for them, these women to have children. So that was part of the Ganawa festival. And then that night, it was just wild, raucous Ganawa groups playing this music. And it's really pretty astounding.
I believe you had described some of the dancing with some twirling hats and...
Yeah. The Ganawa, they have this kind of they call it the fez hat. They've got kind of a long string type thing with like a ball, like some kind of furry ball on the end of it. And part of their performing, and even when I do the sessions, they get their heads spinning around, and that thing goes twirling. And part of the ceremony, I guess, is they'll take turns with these hand clappers, and these clappers are really interesting. And they do these going ticka 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 sound, but it's really, really deep, and it's very metallic. And they do this interesting dance with their heads going around and around and spinning that little thing with their fez hat. And it's almost like they're in a trance. And they'll take turns getting up and dancing, and then sit down and then play some more. Then some other guy will get up and do the same thing. And it's a visually beautiful, but it's I guess an important part of the music and the performance.
Did anyone explain to you what was happening or the meanings of each of the dances?
Well, not in that particular case. I don't know that they had a specific meaning for that dance, but these, I do tell you one thing. So the last recording that I did there was a bunch of some of the hottest Moroccan players in town. We got together at this guy's house, really nice place. Well, it wasn't very big, but, and these guys just started in on it. And Youssef was saying that this could go all night long if you wanted to, and said something about the colors of the rainbow. So there was some kind of a color variation as time went on. Different pieces had a color associated with these, which I thought was fascinating, but I didn't know specifically what that meant. So We did not do the full night recording. The music sounds fairly similar, but these guys they just get into it. I think it's kind of a trance-like thing, and they'll go all night long. Like the Ganala Festival certainly went on for several days, and it went on all night long.
In your travels, you recorded and documented quite a number of trance dances.
Yeah.
Let me play a clip that you provided. I believe it was from Indonesia. So let me go ahead and play that.
Okay.
Now, you've traveled quite extensively in Bali and Indonesia, Java. There was one particular dance you described called the Mended Dance or Festival.
Yeah, that was pretty fascinating. So there was, I was in Bali at that time. I've been there many times. And there's hundreds of festivals hundreds of ceremonies every year in Bali. And they have these interesting calendars. And a lot of it's calendar oriented by seasons or the phase of the moon or even the year. Sometimes this particular temple ceremony that I went to was like 100-year celebration. Every 100 years they do this particular series of ceremonies. So I went there, and of course I always have my backpack and my, basically I'll take a still camera, a camcorder, and then my recording gear. It has to be fairly portable, and I have to be able to set it up quickly. So I saw a set of instruments sitting on the grass within the temple compound. So I just kind of set my stuff up right next to it. And these are what's called gambang. And they're kind of like, it's almost like a little small marimba where they have wooden slats that they hit that are tuned in a really interesting way. And so I sat there, and right next to me, there was a little baby chick that was sitting there, and its little leg was tied to a stick in the grass. And so I'm, not paying much attention to it. And then a priest walks over, pulls its head off, sprinkles the blood around a little bit, and then walks off. So I guess, I don't know if that was the beginning of the ceremony or what. But anyways, then these guys came in and started playing the gumbangs. And it was very interesting, slow type music, not too melodic, but very rhythmic. And they played for a little while, and I recorded. And then suddenly they just stopped, grabbed their instruments, and went running into a different section of the temple. So I followed them, had to, grab my stuff. And in this other courtyard, there's lots and lots of people. There was a big, huge gamelan group, which is a big ensemble. These guys also set their instruments down. And I waited there, and in a short order, these men came out, and they were dancing, like you mentioned, the Mendet dance. So they come out, and they don't have shirts on. They have a hat, and they've got like a sarong, which is around their waist. They have these ceremonial knives that they're carrying called the kris knife, K-R-I-S. The kris knife in Indonesia is a really important symbol, and each kris knife is supposed to have a resident spirit. And some of these kris knives apparently have a genealogy that goes way, way back. So these guys start dancing in a circle, and then they dance with the knives held up. And then the music kind of gets a little bit faster, and then suddenly one guy breaks off from the group and runs out into the middle of the courtyard and tries to stab himself with the kris knife. And he's pushing really, really hard. And he's pushing and pushing and pushing. It won't go in. And then he stands back and he's dancing, and he tries it again. So, he's obviously in a trance, and as supposedly the spirit is protecting him from the blade entering his body. It's a pretty sharp blade. He's pushing really, really hard, And when he pulls it back, you really don't even see a mark on their skin where they've been pushing this thing. So that was pretty fascinating. I filmed it. And then right in front of me was a guy that was in the audience, and then he started kind of going a little bit crazy. And so the priest went up to him, took off his shirt, and then gave him a crysknife, and he went flying out into the middle, and he did the same thing. He started pushing it, trying to stab himself, and it wouldn't go in. He was definitely in a trance. So that is a pretty interesting ceremony that I saw there.
There was a mask dance that I believe you saw where it had something to do with spiritual possession, exorcism.
Yeah, they have many mask dances. There's lots of, quite a number of mask dances. I mean, one reason I've gone back to Indonesia is there's just so much there. I mean, it's from village to village. They have just many traditions and masks and dance and music styles and instruments made from all the bamboo and steel and wood and anything else they can find. But the mask dances, once again, they believe that they're animistic and that almost everything has a resident spirit. Trees, of course, they have spirits. The gong, which is a big part of the Javanese or the Balinese and Javanese gamelan, that's for sure got a spirit. Well, the mask, when they do these mask dances, there's a particular music that goes along with this mask dance, and then once they put the mask on, and with the whole costume, and it takes them sometimes an hour or so to get ready with the whole costume. And then once they put the mask on, that's when the spirit comes in, and they do this dance. So each one is different, and they're fairly precise, and they're not making up these dances. These dances are really a lot of precision involved in them.
What part do these dances play in their culture?
Well, many times these dances are for example, in Indonesia, it's a retelling of some of the classic stories from the Hindu scriptures, from the Ramayana. So they have the Kachak monkey dance is one that's become really popular over the last while, and a lot of different. I've seen lots and lots of Kachak monkey dances. Well, that is retelling the story of the Princess Rahwana, who's captured, the Princess Sita, who's captured by the evil King Rahwana, who's eventually rescued by Hanuman, who's the monkey general of this army of monkeys. I mean, and there's a lot that goes in. It's a tale that goes on for a while. You can see 1 or 2 hour performances that kind of reenact this tale or this important part of the scriptures. And in other cases, there'll be like, there's an old one called, I forgot the name of it. It's an old man dance. And this guy comes out like he's an old man, but then there's an aspect to it that he's the wise. And that's another thing that's really fascinating to me. In a lot of these cultures, the older people are the wise ones. So in a lot of cases in Indonesia, when you enter a room and somebody's older there, you kind of duck your head. I mean, especially if you're like a teenager or a young kid, and there's some masters there. I mean, you really pay great deference to that person when you enter the room, and you treat them with great respect. And in some cases, like in Java, they have various levels of language, and you would talk to them using a certain form of a language that would be not the same that you talk to your brother or your sister.
What's the strangest ceremony or dance that you've ever witnessed?
Well, a lot of them are really strange, but one in particular was, this was in outside of Yogyakarta, in central Java, in a little village. And I was invited by a good friend of mine who's from the area. So we went out to film this, a couple of trance dances. And the first one that we saw, these guys came out with kind of a horse kind of a costume. Some men, they had no shirts on. They had like a little sarong around their waist. And then they had this kind of a framework that had like the tail of a horse type hanging off, and then the front of a horse. And then they had these other guys that came out with whips. And once the music started up and the priest came out and blessed this whole situation, these guys, the spirit of the horse came into apparently, and they actually would get down their hands and knees and start, acting just like horses. They'd eat hay. They, just act like a horse. And these other guys with whips would come and whip the backs of their legs and their backs pretty. And that just didn't seem to bother them at all. But this was all a fascinating dance, a trance dance, where these guys, these guys are whipping these horses, and eventually at the end of the dance, the priest comes out and they seem to be okay, and that's the end of that dance. But it went on for a while. Now, what's the purpose of that particular dance? I'm not exactly sure what that is, other than this is just a demonstration of the spirit, and how you can get through tough times, maybe, or, that the spirit will protect you.
Now, a friend of yours, when you were all filming one of these dances, actually got touched and had an odd experience.
So that was another one. So I was with some friends, and we were watching some children, a children's gamelan group. Now, gamelan is the word for an Indonesian word that refers to orchestra. So a gamelan can be instruments made out of bronze or steel or bamboo. In this particular case, is a typical bronze style of instruments that they hit with mallets, hammers. And it's really fascinating music. So I went to a performance of this children's gamelan. These kids were really great. People, from young age start playing these instruments, and it's really fun to hear that music. It's fun to play or to learn it. Anyway, so here's this dance, these children playing this wonderful music, and they have the old man dance. So it's basically a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, in this costume, acting like he's an old man. Sitting next to me is my friend, and he's got one of these camcorders that sits on his shoulder. So the kid, in the middle of he comes up to the front of the stage, and the music sort of stops, and he goes through this thing like he's scratching his head, and it's like this kind of a wig of long white hair. So he's scratching his head as if there's something in his head, and he pulls out like an imaginary lice or something. And he beckons to my buddy sitting right next to me to come up to the stage. So he's got his camcorder with one hand. He extends his right hand to this kid, who places this imaginary thing in his arm, and he sits down. Well, my friend told me that the second he put that thing in his hand, his arm went numb for about 2 hours. I mean, things like that happen all the time in that place.
Hard to explain.
Hard, yeah. I mean, it's just, who knows what that's all about, but and that's why I keep going to all these different places. I always run into situations like this that, you don't know how to explain it necessarily, but it's a really important part of their culture and who they are and what they do. In Eastern Java, they actually hit stalactites with mallets, and then they sing along with that. I mean, it's cave music. Now, I couldn't believe my ears, and I actually went and recorded cave music. So there's
tell us about that story, cave music.
Yeah, well, so that was the same fellow that we did, that's from Yogyakarta. The thing I love about Indonesia is the government has a cultural division, and they have people that seem to know all these different villages and what's available in these villages. So this Pak Choko friend of mine, I said, look, Pak, we love doing this. I'm in town for a while, and I always try to, spend 4 to 6 weeks or whatever I can spend there. He says, what kind of music's around? I said, well, let me find out. And he said, well, there's a set of caves called Pacitan. So we drove out to these caves, and it takes, a couple hours to get out there. And I really didn't know quite what to expect, but you get inside these caves, and it's not like it's like super long, echoey type stuff. It's kind of a limestone type cave, and it's a little bit on the dead side, but they have these huge stalactites, and they have a ladder that they lean up against, and they have these big, huge rubber-headed mallets. So they had kind of interlocking 2 or 3 guys standing on the ladders, hitting these stalactites in this rhythm. So here's a rhythmic thing. And there was a guy on the ground, a man with a kendang, which is a drum, 2-headed drum, and then some kids. So basically, it's a guy with these kids singing to the rhythmic beating of the stalactites, and that's the cave music. The thing is, when you're sitting there, you have to pinch yourself. I can't believe I'm sitting in a cave listening to these people do this astounding stuff. It's not like there's just a feeling and a spirit to it that's just hard to beat. You just have to be there. The recording is great, but nothing like being there.
Well, sometimes you don't need to travel too far. There's a story that you had, was it in LA with a gamelan?
Oh, yeah, sure. I play with, just for fun, sometimes with at the Indonesian consulate downtown Los Angeles. They have a gamelan group, both Javanese and Balinese. So a few years back, I was asked to come Friday evening to rehearse for some performance. So I went down there, got a little bit late. So I went up to the 5th floor, and we were the only ones in the building at the time. And they were rehearsing the dance with some guys and girls, and they were using just a CD player. So my friend, his name is Wenton, who's a masterful dancer, teacher, also a priest, who teaches at Cal Arts and other UCLA, places like that. He says, let's go down to the gamelan room, which is on the 1st floor, and we'll play the instrument, rehearse that. So I hopped in the elevator with 2 Indonesian guys, and we went to the 1st floor, and there's nobody, there. Walked down the hallway, flipped on the lights in the gamelan room, and we walked a few steps in, and we suddenly heard this really loud banging noise, like ba 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 ba. It was like 2 pieces of metal being hit together, and there was nobody there. So these guys got a frightened look and ran out of the room. So I'm just standing there, and at the end of the room is a big, huge gong, and the gong has a stand made out of pipes, water pipes. So a few minutes later, Wenton comes down there, and they're talking to him, Indonesian, and he goes over and sits in front of the gong and prays. So after a while, he gets up, and I go over, what was that all about? He says, well, Chuck, as you know, the gong has a resident spirit, and you're supposed to make offerings to the spirit, but here at the consulate, they don't always do that. So it was just making itself known. So I heard that sound, and I've told that story, several times. And there's a gamelan room at Cal Arts that's open 24/7. And students have told me, and there's a couch there. Sometimes I go there and fall asleep on the couch, and the gong will go off, wake them up. So, that's the spirit of the gong.
We've talked somewhat about the importance of this music and the ceremonies to these tribal cultures. And your work is documenting and in many ways preserving that and those traditions and that music. Do you see out there a danger that these tribal communities are losing their music?
Actually, not too much. I mean, in places that I've been, this is such an important part of who they are and what they do that I'm really not too afraid of that. The young people, of course, they want to be hip, and they want to, they like the For example, in Indonesia, they listen to the rock records and pop stuff that we put out. And sometimes they try to mix it together. But the traditional stuff is really, it's in a place of its own. It's so intimately a part of the ceremony that I don't think that's ever going to go away. I mean, it's really a critical part of that. And they've really, and they have some excellent universities where the kids will go and study this music. And I have not seen much where, that would be lost. Certainly not in that area. In other places, it kind of depends on the groups. If for some reason the group is like leaving their traditional places, I mean, that might be a situation where they, if they move into the city, it may not be the same. But as long as they stay in their, traditional habitats or places that they live, their homes, the villages, I think that it's going to be maintained. And the people are so creative and they're so good. I mean, I've recorded people, that work by day in the rice fields and at night I consider them world-class musicians. I mean, the way they play drums or other instruments, I mean, you could outplay anybody in the States.
Quite an adventure.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the fact that you go in there looking for something that's important to them gets you into places that you would not ever get otherwise.
Just fascinating. Just fascinating how all around the world, the importance of music, the central importance of music, and how it really transcends cultures, boundaries, time.
Yeah. Just almost any place in the world you can think of it, especially, and that's why I haven't spent lots of time in Europe. I mean, they have some wonderful music in Europe, but I tend to go to kind of the third world countries where there's, little village things. And that's where I've gotten some, in more over the tropical areas. And I've gotten some just really wonderful music in those places.
Well, Chuck, thanks for sharing these stories with us. I hope in the future you come back and share some more.
Yeah, I got lots of stories.
We need to get together again and hear some more of those.
Absolutely. Be happy to do it anytime.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhart.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures from the wild places of the world.